All right, I see people trickling in from the waiting room. Welcome. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to Leveraging Technology to Expand Survivors' Healing and Justice Options. My name is Flaja. I am a student staff member at the Share Title IX, Title VI office here at Stanford. And today we'll explore how technology is creating new pathways for survivors of sexual violence to access care, information, and support. Beyond reporting, these tools are helping organizations strengthen prevention, provide trauma-informed services, and center survivor voices. Our panel will share how technology is advancing advocacy while supporting survivors' needs. Next slide, please. All right, this program is brought to you by Stanford University's Share Title IX and Title VI office in Callisto. Share, Stanford's central resource for addressing and preventing discrimination, sexual harassment, and sex-based violence, provides educational programming, supportive measures, and trauma-informed investigations. We encourage Stanford students, faculty, and staff who experience or witness sexual violence, harassment, or discrimination based on sex, gender, race, color, or national origin to report to our office. Reports allow us to provide students with resources they have the right to access, such as supportive measures such as housing support, academic support, safety planning, and more. In the chat, you'll find the link to our website to report Title IX and Title VI misconduct, along with our email, phone number, and office location. Next, a reminder of confidentiality. Stanford staff hosting this session are responsible employees required to report misconduct, including harassment and discrimination based on sex, race, color, and national origin under university policy. Please keep this in mind when submitting questions or using the chat. To report, visit our website, email, or call us. The information will be shared in the chat. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that this event may bring up emotions. With that said, we want to highlight supportive resources. Stanford affiliates can contact the confidential support team or the faculty staff help center. Links and phone numbers will be shared in the chat and again at the end. Can I get the next slide, please? Perfect. Non-Stanford viewers, can access the National Sexual Violence Resource Center to find their local resources or the crisis text line for 24/7 support. Next slide. Now I'm going to pass it to Zoya to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Pelagia. I'm really excited to introduce the amazing panelists that we have on today's call. So starting off with Tracy DeMasi. She's the Chief Executive Officer at Callisto. She has held leadership roles and positions over the last 20 years across the nonprofit sector, where she developed and implemented trauma-informed programming and curricula. She was instrumental in changing domestic violence laws in the US and has worked on projects globally with the Commonwealth of Nations, Ecuador, Australia, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Ghana. Previously, Tracy was the co-founder of Good People Collective, the interim executive director at No More, and the VP of Domestic Violence Services at the YWCA. As a licensed clinical social worker, Tracy has extensive experience working in the field of gender-based violence, giving her a deep understanding of the ecosystem of survivors, offenders, and allies. She's consulted with organizations to develop tech-based tools, such as an app that educates users about violence against women, a smartphone device for sexual violence prevention safety, and virtual reality trainings to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-sexual harassment. Our next speaker is Kenyora Johnson MSW. She's the CEO of End Rape on Campus. With a decade of experience, she has collaborated with youth, families, college students, administrators, and leaders such as the late Mayor Thomas M. Menino and the Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Before End Rape on Campus, Kenyora worked in nonprofits and higher education institutions like Brandeis University, Strong Women, Strong Girls, and Simmons University. Currently on the advisory board of Culture of Respect and NASPA initiative, Kenyora has held roles such as president of the African-American Alumnae Association of Simmons University, vice chair of the Institute for Research on Male Supremacism, advisory board member of the Every Voice Coalition, and the Alumni Association Board at Boston University School of Social Work. She's a recognized voice on anti-campus sexual violence, featured in major media, and honored by Ignite National as a leader on fire in 2021. Kenyora is an alumni of the 2023 Roddenberry Foundation Fellowship. Our next speaker is Kyle Linton. He is a co-founder of Our Wave. Kyle was inspired to start Our Wave after his loved one experienced gender-based violence in 2018. Kyle attended and graduated from NC State in 2014 with a bachelor's in business administration. After graduating, Kyle launched an AI-informed digital therapeutic platform and later joined and led the software design development consulting agency. Through our way, Kyle has built a network of major organizations serving survivors online. Cal brings over a decade of experience leading social impact organizations, bringing, um, building impactful products for industry leaders like Bayer, Intel, DraftKings, and Cree, managing over $5 million US in invested capital. Our last speaker is Julia Fishko. She's a trauma-informed educator, sexual assault survivor, and co-founder of Free Drones, a public benefit corporation building #WithYouDo, a peer-led social safety platform designed to strengthen early response after sexual harm. Drawing from lived experience and 7 years of frontline advocacy work with survivors, Julia focuses on closing the gap between disclosure and care and reducing the isolation that so often follows harm. She's also the co-founder and educational director of the Global Trauma Institute, where she develops and teaches trauma-informed certification programs for coaches, advocates, and practitioners. Across her work, Julia centers non-pathologizing, survival-led approaches that recognize harm as an injury deserving immediate care and connection. At Free Jones, she leads trauma-informed design and ethical framework development, ensuring that technology strengthens privacy, agency, and peer capacity rather than replacing human support. Her work bridges advocacy, education, and product innovation to build scalable infrastructure for accessible, survivor-centered care in digital spaces. Thank you all again for joining us today. We'll now begin with brief presentations from our panelists, starting with Kenyora Johnson, the CEO of NRAPE on Campus.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Callisto for having me a part of your Leveraging Technology event. I just also want to say that if you see any cats, on my desk or anything, please shout out some loves, some hearts. But again, my name is Kenyora Johnson, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of NRAPE on Campus. And I will be presenting to you today on our Campus Accountability Mapping Tool. But before we go to the next slide, I just want to give a brief introduction to EROC for those who may be unfamiliar. So in 2013, EROC was founded by students who, after experiencing their own connected and shared experiences of campus sexual assault, essentially banded together to create what we know to be now NRAPE on Campus, or EROC. And it was through that work and the subsequent dismissal of responses from their respective universities, like that of the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, is what also led them to the creation of EROC. EROC essentially works to end campus sexual assault through support, prevention education, and policy reform from the campus to the federal levels, centering on historically excluded and systemically marginalized student survivors. We envision a world in which every individual has an educational experience that is free from violence, and until then, that all survivors are believed, trusted, and supported. And our mission and our vision essentially is driven by our Centering the Margins framework, which really aims to address and fill the disparity of resources between different communities with the intention of centering historically excluded and systemically marginalized student survivors. So you may hear me talk about that for a bit. Next slide. So one of the things that we had seen over the past decade plus is that survivors of campus sexual assault across the country really banded together like never before to support one another and to shift our culture from one of that to one of that of safety and respect. But whether it was redefining consent or pressuring schools to conduct annual campus climate surveys, the new generation of advocates that we know have always advocated for transparency and accountability because they understood that those two things were keys to creating meaningful long-term change. And one of our partners, Know Your Nine, had a report that said nearly 40% of survivors who report to their school will be pushed out of education as a result. And so we wanted to figure out what was this thing that could allow students to know beforehand what transparency and accountability look like. Because what we know is that we've seen power of transparency in action. Just in the last few years alone, survivors have begun their work to break the silence, really, really more out there than you have seen before about institutional cover-ups, and have been holding their institutions accountable under Title IX, which I'm not going to talk about too much into today, but if there's any questions, please feel free to ask, which essentially spurred institutions to change their ways or risk scrutiny in the public eye. Next slide. So we, EROC, came together and met this opportunity, and that's where the Campus Accountability Map and Tool came in. It's essentially a digital platform that enables current and prospective students. So if you're a high school student or a current college student, you can compare sexual assault policies of colleges and universities across the country, including in-depth information on each institution's sexual assault policies, statistics, prevention efforts, and survivor support resources. We have about 1,700 colleges and universities on the map and tool right now, including those located in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. And we have every historically Black college and university, or HBCU, all of the tribal serving institutions, a majority of the Hispanic serving institutions. Community colleges are also included on this map and tool. And then, of course, your Ivy Leagues, Big Ten universities, and things of that nature. I do want to make a note that on this map and tool, we do not include high schools or K through 12 as a whole, because that is a huge undertaking. But before I go too far in, we'll go to our next slide where we get to show you a little bit of what that tool looks like.
Navigating resources and reporting is overwhelming, and the Title IX reporting process can be daunting. Student survivors are often ignored, dismissed, or shamed. That's why we created the Campus Accountability Map and Tool. Our interactive database collects and organizes critical data where you can find and compare school sexual assault statistics, investigation policies, support resources, and prevention efforts all in one place. To compare schools, use the menu on the left. Click Compare with Other Schools and select up to 3 schools from the drop-down menus. To learn more about the Campus Accountability Map and Tool, visit endrapeoncampus.org.
Thank you, Sarifa. There is a little music to that for those who may not have heard it. Let me give Sarifa some time to get back. Awesome. There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Sarifa. So the map and tool, as you heard, has 5 types of data information. So numerical statistics, policy information that regards consent, sexual assault and retaliation, just to name a few things, prevention efforts, including university-sponsored trainings, investigation policies and procedures for each campus, and survivor support resources. And all of that has been, in terms of the numbers especially, has been included following the Clery Act. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Clery Act is where schools are federally obligated to disclose the crime statistics of their campus. So the statistics that you see on the map and tool include the number of reported rapes, fondlings, domestic violence incidences, dating violence incidences, and stalking. If we go to the next slide, we can give you a little bit more of a visual of that. And this is just these old numbers. I want to also fair warn everyone who decides to go on the map and tool themselves. And this is a kind of an old interface, but same thing if you were to go on the map and tool now. Just this gives you a visual representation of that. So you would be able to click on each school's profile, see where they stand in terms of the national average, and then also go into some qualitative data like that of policy information, survivor resources, and investigation policies and the like. And all of that, if you go to the next slide, And this may be hard to see, but essentially, when you go on the mapping tool, you have the ability to compare and contrast each of the schools, all the way down from the statistics and the other several approaches I've mentioned. That way it gives you that clear comparison of, one university against another with regards to what types of information they have, and easier to obtain and see, like, how do they approach this issue. I also want to mention that some of the numbers, while they may look low, doesn't necessarily mean that campus sexual assault doesn't occur. It just may mean that the school doesn't have the same reporting mechanisms that are a much larger school that has larger numbers may have. Because I also want to say is that if you see a school that has larger numbers, it doesn't necessarily mean that, it means that there's definitely an issue. But what it also means is that schools have resources and have built a community that have allowed students to feel safe to report to their school. So high numbers, while it's bad and it shows like there's something going on, the flip side of that is that there's something that's happening that allows the students to feel safe enough to go and say, hey, this happened to me, to their Title IX office. So I just want to put that kind of disclosure there for anyone who decides to go to the mapping tool online. I also want to say that there may be some things on this mapping tool that may be an error. So what we also do is we welcome any user, whether they're a staff member from the school or they're just simply someone who's just looking to understand. We accept any type of corrections on our mapping tool. Right now, things are a little bit on pause, but we will make sure to update as quickly as we can, and prioritize any of those errors that come in. One of the things that we have been thinking about too is incorporating a ranking or rating system in which the communities of each school, community members of each school gets to rate or rank their university on how well they are doing in approaching campus sexual assault. This is something that we are thinking about to implement in the next couple of years, because we want to make sure that we're doing some research, gathering some feedback, and building out what that initial criteria will look like. And majority of that information will come from students themselves. But I want to pause here because I know there's going to be a lot of questions possibly for this, and so that way we can get to our next person. But for now, I'll hand it back to Sarifa. And thank you again.
Hey everyone, my name is Julia Pishko and I'm the co-founder of Three Joannes. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about our app with you too. But before I show you the app, I would love for you to hear from our founder, Jess Michaels, about why it exists.
I'm a 1991 Jeffrey Epstein survivor, and I've been living with post-traumatic stress disorder ever since. I also grew up in Newtown, Connecticut, where the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School happened. I know what it looks like when the world opens its arms to a traumatized community. And I know what it feels like when a community recoils from a survivor of sexual assault. That contrast is what I built a company around. Every other phenomenal panelist here is using incredible technology to support survivors after harm happens. Julia and I are here to talk about the supporters of sexual assault survivors. Because when a young person is sexually assaulted, the first person that they tell is often not a hotline, not a Title IX coordinator, not a counselor. It's a roommate, a teammate, a best friend at 2 a.m. And that friend has no idea what to do. That friend has no idea that sexual assault survivors have higher rates of PTSD than even combat veterans, or that sexual assault is an injury needing first aid care before it's a crime demanding investigation or interrogation. That friend has no idea that research confirms that if known trusted peers surround a victim in safety, trust, and support in the first 24 to 72 hours and provide sustained care for up to 90 days, sexual assault survivors had significantly better outcomes at 3 months before symptoms became chronic and a PTSD diagnosis is locked in. So we built a first aid kit to help those friends. That we don't just make better braking systems to prevent car accidents. We have seatbelts for when an accident happens. After Sandy Hook, we put active shooter drills in every single school in our country to minimize the damage and loss of life when a shooter enters a building. And yet, our children are more than 250 times likely to be sexually assaulted than killed or injured in a school shooting. And we, as a society, have never built a safety plan for when this horrific thing happens. So we built it. My co-founder Julia is going to demonstrate with you two the world's first social safety app for student communities and the platform we built to gently guide friends to know what to do when someone they love says me too.
Thanks, Rafa. We can go to the next slide. So Jess built this incredible framework based on her life experience, and I've taken my advocacy experience, to give the app its trauma-informed content. With You Too is built on 3 pillars. This is people, pact, and plan. You can think of it like stop, drop, and roll, something that's simple enough to remember when everything gets a bit chaotic. We start with people, a circle of a few trusted peers who commit to showing up for each other. I want you to think of the people you'd call in a crisis and then take the time to connect with them daily in a private feed. It's not about likes or followers. It's just a few people who actually care about one another. Go to the next slide. Those people each have their own unique way of showing up and helping. So what your circle will do is take a short quiz that identifies each of your natural support superpowers. You can find out if you're a comforter, a strategist, or an advocate, because when everyone has a role, no one is left wondering what to do. The next step is pact. This is where preparation happens before any crisis does. It's the place that you can check in, you can share your capacity, your mood, or a short reflection with your circle. It takes 60 seconds. And that one moment a day builds trust and the habit of showing up. With an extra couple of minutes, you can take a short lesson that will boost your support skills and your confidence. So when something does go wrong, you and everyone in your circle already knows how to respond. Plan is then activated if someone needs help. So with one tap, anyone can send a support signal to their circle with no words or explanation needed. The center of plan is something that has never existed before, and that is the sexual assault first aid kit. It's a step-by-step 90-day peer support plan that is built on the research that Jess just talked about. It's designed for those friends who are going to be first on the scene. The way it works is this. When that support signal goes out, each person already knows their role. They know their strengths. They know those support superpowers. So now they know what their next step is. The comforter is going to show up and create immediate safety. The strategist is assessing those care needs. The advocate is showing up, helping to navigate any of those institutional processes that come up. And then the survivor is getting the care that they need and deserve right away. So with people, pact, and plan, nobody has to figure any of this out alone. So the research is clear. We know that positive peer support significantly reduces PTSD risk. We know that preparation prevents the worst outcomes. And that's the principle that has guided every safety system that society has ever created. So we built the one that nobody thought to build for the change that we want to see in this movement. And thank you all for being here, and thanks Stanford for inviting us to speak today.
Hey everybody, my name is Kyle Linton, and I'm the Executive Director at R-Wave. Wanted to thank Callisto and Stanford for inviting us to be here today, and I'll just jump right in. So we have created an online space for survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse to connect, access resources, ask questions, and ultimately find pathways to healing. If you could go to the next slide. So just to sort of frame our work, and all of us are pretty familiar with this, all the organizations in the call, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men, 1 in 2 gender diverse folks are going to experience sexual or intimate partner violence in their lifetime. This disproportionately affects those that are under the age of 18. And a lot of the folks that end up experiencing these issues never end up getting help. If you could go to the next slide. I think that really where we come in the way that we think about these problems is that the traditional institutions that are in place, rape crisis centers, online, or I'm sorry, college university resources, hotlines, these have been amazing resources for survivors, especially survivors that are coming from sort of an emergency crisis standpoint. But we really think that there's a huge opportunity to improve the infrastructure of information in online spaces and help bridge this digital gap to support survivors overall. If you could go to the next slide. So the way that we really think about this is we've created a trauma-informed online space where survivors can go, they can disclose, with our sort of recognition that disclosure is oftentimes the first part in the process of accessing resources and finding help. We then give survivors the ability to ask questions, engage with experts on our platform, and join others in community. We're sort of recognizing that, the individual survivor isn't alone. That's what we hear a lot of the times from the folks that submit to us. And then really our dream is to leverage really high quality design and the best in class research to create healing curriculums and programs that are customized for survivors of all different backgrounds, recognizing that some survivors may have experienced things when they were younger, trauma when they were younger, versus some may have experienced in a college environment. And so we really want to create systems that are customized to these different identities of folks and are able to be measurable in terms of helping folks find healing over time. If you could go to the next slide. So to date, really just talking a little bit about the traction of our platform specifically, we've had a little over 500,000 folks access the R-Wave site. We've had thousands of submissions to our site from individual survivors. We've done over 64,000 resource referrals. So that's individual survivors clicking on resources after they share their story, after they ask a question. We've got over 1.5 million views on our content. And then we've sent a lot of milestones out to individual survivors saying, hey, this is the number of people that your story or your question has impacted directly, which sort of helps build that sort of communal piece. If you could go to the next slide. So like I said, we've grown tremendously over the years. And really, I came into the space not knowing a lot about the space as a whole, and we've just surrounded ourselves with experts and other folks who could help us build something that's valuable. And our sort of growth has shown that over time. Next slide, please. And what's really, I think, beautiful and exciting about what we've built is we've seen this huge response from a global community. We've had submissions from over 78 countries, all of the states in the United States, and we're really excited to sort of take this on with other partners in how do we contextualize, survivor healing for all of these different global audiences, taking into consideration cultural context and language and everything else. Next slide, please. And like I was saying a little bit earlier, I think really our work is really the combination of, several different areas. It's good technology, it's good research, it's design, and then it's also movement building and partnerships. We really are a tech company in a nonprofit's body. That's kind of the way I would describe us, where we have to think about things scalably and bringing together these different departments to build these useful technologies and tools for survivors, and really ingesting data from the populations that we're serving to understand how we can build and iterate and improve these tools better. Next slide, please. And we've been very lucky that we've had a huge number of people that have joined us along the way. We have a ton of volunteers that have reached out to us, and originally we were a volunteer team until we went full time, and so we're able to really leverage all the skills and expertise of all this of this diverse population of folks that are passionate about all these different subject areas, which we're very, very thankful for. Next slide. There we go. And I think that the other thing that's super important to recognize here is that we're not doing this work alone. We don't want to be the only tool in the toolkit. We know that there are other tools in the toolkit. There are other organizations doing this super important work. So we're super proud that we've been able to license or partner with organizations like Me Too International, No More, USA Gymnastics, It's on Us, and Rape on Campus. So several of the folks in the call, obviously. And we really think it's so important to do this movement building work together. Next slide. And so the last thing I'll say quickly is we're very interested in how we can adapt and utilize artificial intelligence tools in our work. And so one of the big areas that we're doing that this year is really around our Harbor Healing Program. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this is really the combination effort of our team and our researcher, Dr. Laura Cinco, who's a professor at Temple University. And she's really done a ton of research, published, I think, about 50 times around how do we measure survivor healing? How do we customize survivor healing? How do we figure out the different states that folks come to us in? And then how can we provide resources to those folks depending on those different character traits and identities that they hold? Next slide, please. And really, that's the goal here, right? Is how do we use data and good design and good research to personalize healing journeys for survivors, to measure them over time, to, how can we sort of validate the approaches that we're taking, but also do it in a scalable and seamless and extremely thoughtful way. And I think I'm almost done. So really our goal by 2030 is to support about 1 million survivors. We're well on our way in that direction. And so I would just welcome anyone to reach out to us, to volunteer with us or connect us with donors or partners. We want to do this work together. And final slide, please. And please reach out to us and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And I will go last. I'm Tracy D. Tomasi. I am the CEO of Callisto, and we are a national tech for good nonprofit that builds technologies to help support survivors of sexual violence. And what our technology does in a nutshell is it helps survivors find out if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else. So if you could flip to the next slide. So approximately 2.5 million students are sexually assaulted each year, or sexually assaulted or raped each year on a college campus. And when you hear a number like 2.5 million and see these statistics, it seems like addressing this problem is impossible, but we know that it's not. And that's because 2.5 million is really the symptom of the problem, but it's been framed as the problem. And the problem is perpetrators. If you can flip to the next slide. So 90% of campus sexual assaults are committed by serial perpetrators who, next slide, on average offend 6 times before they graduate college. So what we're trying to do, if you want to flip the slide, is to connect at least 2 survivors, because if perpetrators are held accountable after their second assault, then we're going to prevent sexual assault on college campuses by 59%. And I want to be clear that 1 assault is way too many, but we know the systems aren't working like they should right now, and these perpetrators are really getting away with it. So eventually, in 5 to 10 years, I hope that Callisto technology doesn't need to exist, but we know that right now it can be really helpful. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a demo. First of all, anybody in the US and its territories with a .edu email address has free access to this. Callisto Vault is an end-to-end encrypted platform, which means that all of your data gets encrypted prior to hitting our servers. And that's really important because we take security very, very seriously, and we limit a lot of the information that we have in our system as well. So you can flip the slide. What a survivor would do after they get access is that they would click that enter into matching button. And then they're going to see the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to put in the state where the assault occurred. And that is because sexual assault laws vary by state, and we want to be able to help them and know what those state laws are before an advocate meets with them. The next thing that they're going to do is they're going to enter a unique identifier of their offender. And so they're going to put in their perpetrator's Twitter handle, their Instagram, their TikTok, whatever the case may be. They're going to put in as many as they know because that's what we use to match on. So if 2 people put in that same TikTok handle, let's say, there's a match. The survivors don't know that there's a match automatically. It's not like a dating app. What happens is that we get notified, but even at Callisto, I cannot see the perpetrator's information or the survivor's information. We assign that case to a confidential advocate through Ampersand's advocacy resources, and they reach out to the survivors separately to say there's been a match in Callisto's system and gives them the opportunity to meet with that advocate for free. If the survivor has a choice to do that, and if they choose to do that, the survivors will explain what happened to them and get their options, whether those options are criminal justice, civil justice, Title IX, mental health, whatever the case may be. And then after going through the risks, the advocate will work to connect the survivors together if the survivor chooses, and then the survivors can pursue healing and justice, whatever that means for them. So it's important to note that we do not report to Title IX, HR, or police. We believe that that is we want to empower survivors to do that if they so choose, and we believe that that is their choice. We are not a public database that anybody can sort through. So we are not like the T app. We are not like, are we dating the same guy Facebook groups? And we also don't investigate what happens. We are really about connecting those survivors so that they know what they can do and what they want to do. So in a nutshell, that is Callisto. And now I'm going to bring all the panelists back up, and there will be time for questions for all of us about how our technology works a little bit. But again, thank you to Stanford for bringing us all together and inviting Callisto to be a partner with us. And as soon as we heard that we could have this opportunity, we're like, we need to make this a full tech panel. And that was why I was able to invite our partners to join us, because I think that it's really important that you all hear from all of us in our different perspectives, because our tech is all so different and a lot of it is just so complementary as well. So the first question that we want to talk about is, what impacts have you seen on the lives of survivors that have used your technology? So Kenyora, why don't you start us off with that?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things I'll say that we have seen is validation. Survivors often believe that they are alone or that what happened to them was mishandled in isolation. So when they see broader patterns that can reduce self-harm and affirm the systemic issues are real. So with our mapping tool, we've seen survivors feel support, especially through advocacy work. Students and organizers have used some of our data to really push for policy reform, survivor-centered resources that they may not have had on their campus because another campus that is similar in size, has it. We've even seen folks with, make change in terms of their staff, employees at the school. So some folks have had stronger institutional responses. And then for some of our prospective students and families, it has also created a new layer of informed choice. So, as high school students are trying to figure out what that next move is, come their senior year, now they have a little bit more to add to their toolkit when they're making their decision on what school they want to attend. And for them, it's about having that safety and accountability should now be a part of how people evaluate campuses. Because people think that campus sexual assault only happens in college or higher education, but forgetting about K through 12 as well. And so a lot of folks in the K through 12 space are thinking about similar things that a college student would be thinking. But now it's about how do we move forward into this more prevention work as we enter into colleges. And then what I will say, even for the broader movement, is it has helped move conversations along. From just here's what happened to me to here's what's happening to us across the United States. So moving from anecdote to evidence. And we feel that survivors deserve empathy and infrastructure, and that technology can help provide that infrastructure when used responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all that. And I think, at Callisto, we did a survey last year, and And obviously, I think we can all say that connection and knowing that you're not alone is so important, which is why our tech all works in different ways to provide that for survivors. And last year, when we surveyed users of Callisto, they said that 75% had improved their emotional well-being by using Callisto, and that 90% said that they felt more secure just knowing that a platform like Callisto existed. And we know that about 1 in 40 entries matches. And so they do find that match. And I think and that's with us not even like pushing it out broadly as far as people don't know that they have access to that. And, I've been doing this work for 25 years, and I think that I hear all the time of like, I wonder if he did it to somebody else. I want to report or don't want to or think about reporting because I don't want him to do this to somebody else. And this is an option to find that whether or not you've reported to Title IX, whether or not you've reported to the police. And I think that is just so necessary. So with that, Kyle, what about you? I know that you talked a little bit about your impacts in your presentation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most sort of easily accessible or anecdotal piece of feedback regarding impact would just be that, I think when survivors, after they experience trauma, they're not always quite sure, at least from the data patterns we've seen, how to label that trauma, how to figure out what is the next step in the process. And so I think that lowering that barrier of information and allowing survivors to submit their questions in their own to submit words and their stories in their own words, we're able to sort of see the way that people think about what they've experienced and then provide expert-driven answers that sort of respond to those areas, help folks label and help them figure out what is that next step. Do I want to consider reporting? Do I want to access a support group? Do I want to access other kinds of resources? I think that, helping really open up that top of the funnel and make that super accessible with online tools like ours, I think has really given that opportunity to get more people into that support funnel to then help guide them in the direction that would be most helpful for them. But I do think I would just say it's the same as everybody else. It's validation. It's helping survivors not feel so alone. It's helping them understand that their unique experiences have also been experienced by other folks, and really then how do we channel all of that into sort of impact and prevention.
Yeah, I love that. I think that all of our tech also just focuses on giving survivors options and putting them in the driver's seat and just the knowledge about what resources are out there and how to navigate these really complex systems. So, Julia, I'm going to turn to you next. And how do you ensure that the technology we develop remains survivor-centered and responsive to their evolving needs? Because I think building technology is one thing, building survivor-centered technology is a very different thing for some of us.
Yeah, absolutely. As survivors ourselves, I think we are starting there, right? Having a technology be created by people who have already walked this walk is really crucial to understanding how long that response needs to last. So we know that being survivor-centered isn't just a design principle, it's an ongoing practice. Through Jess's public advocacy work and all of the time I've spent on hotlines and in hospitals, we've met so many survivors and seen like in real time what trauma-informed support can really change for them. And we've also seen the outcomes when they didn't get that, and that was lacking there. When survivors were there alone, dealing with this injury while being surrounded with strangers. And however well-intentioned these strangers were, they're trained to focus on the investigation and on protocols, not really on caring for that injury to the nervous system. So when I met Jess and she told me her idea for sexual assault first aid, I knew from experience like how powerful it could be because it centers the care of survivors and the way it does that. It gets them to safety by connecting them with the people that they already know and trust. And it prepares them to know exactly what to do, because I can show up in a hospital room and like be there for someone, but it's not the same as when someone they know and love and trust is in that space with them. So survivors have told us time and time again, all the things that they needed but couldn't get and what they wish their friends had known, what would have made them feel less alone in those moments. And supporters have told us how much they want to help, but like how scared they are of saying the wrong thing or getting something wrong, making it worse. So sometimes they freeze up too. And that's what With You Too is really built around, not just this list of resources to choose from, because those are amazing, but in an overwhelming moment, it's hard to know what to do with all of them. So we wanted to create a place where people could reach out to the people they trust, knowing that those people would be guided each step of the way too, and they're not figuring it out on their own either. And as far as like ongoing evolving responses, we know what someone needs in that first 24 hours to a week is very different than what they need weeks and months later. Support has to be evolving as those needs evolve. And that's why the care plan we built offers guidance for 90 days. We can only take in so much information at once. So I think giving people bite-sized information that can help them for a few months after can really support them. And I think that last piece too is really teaching those supporters that their role is to show up for someone, not to manage them, to be informed about all the options, but not be there to make the decisions. It's like really just, I think, walking alongside someone, ready to respond to whatever need is coming up when it comes up. And in that way, we can keep on centering the voice and choice of survivors and making sure that no one supporter or survivor is going through this alone.
That's so great. And Kenyora, what about EROC? What are you all doing to ensure that technology that you develop remains survivor-centered?
Yeah, I mean, just making sure that survivors or anyone who comes to our site are not just seen as end users, but that they're stakeholders in our design and the feedback and the evolution of the mapping tool. And the evolution and the development of the mapping tool, what we have done is we've paid attention to the survivors' experiences. We've listened continuously to what they've been telling us. And it's not always just survivors too, it's also parents of survivors who have endured, some of the experiences that their child has on campuses with respect to, law enforcement or Title IX, because everyone's trying to figure out what to do because this is maybe the first time that they're experiencing something like this on this campus, on their campuses. We've also thought about what are the advocacy trends that are happening? What are the legal shifts that are occurring, especially with Title IX and the flip-flopping that has transpired over the last few administrations. And then, of course, accessibility needs. We know that there are a lot of students out there who are neurodivergent or may have a disability. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting students at their unique needs. And then I would also say that very much similar to what Julia had mentioned, survivors' needs evolve, technology evolves and changes, and also cultural context changes as well. And so survivor, centered design is not a one-time achievement, right? Like we have to have an ongoing practice of feedback. We have to have an ongoing practice of iteration. I don't foresee that this map tool is always going to stay what you initially see it to be right now. It may change in about 3 years, next year even. But we also know that accountability also looks different too. And so we want to make sure that we're adding systems of accountability to the mapping tool. But by doing so, we made sure that we're having survivors who are helping to build that out. When we created the mapping tool, we didn't like staff members just sit around a room and then talk to web developers and say, this is what we want. No, we sat down with survivors and we also had them be volunteers with us to integrate the colleges and universities on the mapping tool so they'd be a part of the building, the edification of the mapping tool. We had over 150 people literally help us with this thing. Because if the people who are most impacted are not shaping the tool, then it risks becoming extractive instead of helpful.
I couldn't agree more. I think that over the years, I've seen technology to try to help survivors, and you can absolutely tell the ones that did not talk to survivors and the ones that have talked to survivors. So I think kind of adding onto that question is the ethical considerations that we are all grappling with when we are developing this technology and as we're evolving this technology. And so I want to start by kind of talking about some of the ethical issues that we experience at Callisto. And part of it is our encryption. Our encryption encryption is incredible. It's top of the line. We're the only people in the world doing this. And part of that is really, really hard because we don't know how people are going to misuse it. We don't know how the bad actors are going to use it. And so we try to think about the Harvey Weinsteins of the world and the people with resources and ability and how they have hurt survivors and followed them for decades and decades. One of our board members is Rowena Chu, who was assaulted by Harvey Weinstein in the 90s. We talk with Jess, who's the Epstein survivor, about these things too, and what they need. And so we have locked ourselves out of a lot of the data. And a lot of times, especially when I talk to tech folks, they're like, oh, well, you just need to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, we can't because our demographics don't connect to the entries. We know the demographics in aggregate, but we don't want to follow somebody's path. So we don't always know where we're losing people along the path. And we could add that feature in, but then that means that we are collecting more survivor information that we have the ability to decrypt in different ways, and we don't want to do that. And so we have my engineer and I have these conversations all of the time, and in the end, as much as possible, we always side with survivor safety. When I first started at Callisto 4 years ago, we didn't collect demographics, and we realized we have to know who's using our system. We have to use that for grants. It's the only way that we can keep our doors open to keep this technology running. So how do we do that in the best way possible that still protects survivors? When we first started, we didn't have password resets because in order to have a password reset, you have to collect somebody's email address, and we were trying not to have that information. Well, we realized that people in trauma are not going to remember their password. And I don't think that anybody, even if they have trauma, is going to remember their password. And we did have a way for them to reset it, but then that required remembering where you put your backup codes. And most people don't think about backup codes. So we updated the system in 2023 to really include that before we launched nationally to anybody with a .edu. So those are some of the many things, like a few of the many things that we grapple with all the time when we're thinking about these ethical considerations. But Julia, I want to hear what with you too is grappling with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for letting me blame trauma for always losing my passwords, Tracy. That's helpful. I think it with you too, every ethical consideration that we have made is starting just with this question of, is this protecting and serving best the person using it in a very vulnerable moment? So our design itself is intentionally trauma informed at every step of the way, not just in the words of the amount of words we're choosing, but in how the whole thing simply feels to use. That's only been possible because our engineer and UI designer, Khan, is a trauma care practitioner. He is trained in this. He's actually a published author on trauma-informed technology. So these accessibility and design choices are showing up in ways that people might not even notice. Like, is there like a cognitive overload? Is there too much text on the screen at once? Like, we try and avoid that. The imagery we choose, the way that the app is going to offer really simple choices and ongoing guidance one little bit at a time. We've tried to build it to feel safe because we know we can't really think clearly or learn or make decisions if we don't feel safe in that moment. That's not a mindset issue. That's just the neurobiology, right? So we had to design with that in mind. And I think what you all have been doing, being able to get that privacy right, to really show up ethically in this space is a tricky thing. And because we need this technology to be a safe place to take those steps. And for us, it's to take that first step of having a hard conversation or asking for help, maybe before you're ready to do anything official. So we tried to build it that way. So our data is pseudonymized, activity is private by default, and users are choosing every step of the way what and how much they would share with anyone, even in their private circle. Even joining someone's circle, it requires an explicit approval after they've sent an invite. We want to make sure, again, like y'all are saying, like to stay away from like those bad actors that can be getting into those private spaces. And aside from that, we don't sell data. We're not going to run ads. We're not going to build a business on the back of the worst moment of someone's life. So any data that we are collecting, we're using just with the main purpose of making the app more effective for the next survivor who needs it.
That's so great. So, a lot of times when we talk about tech, we think about all the ways that tech can be used terribly. There's so much tech facilitated abuse that's happening right now. And we are all tech for good companies that are really trying to combat that. And so, Kenyora, I want to hear from you about any potential drawbacks or risks associated to relying on technology in our anti-sexual violence advocacy efforts, and how do we mitigate those?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because this is something that I was trying to think very long on. I'd say one, technology is not is a tool, but it's not a replacement for how we care for one another. It's not a replacement for policy reform or even a replacement for cultural change. Risks include privacy breaks, misinformation, over reliance on automation, digital exclusion at times, and honestly, re-traumatization of users' experiences, especially when we think about chat boxes that we may come across when we go on someone's website, or assuming access equals justice. For example, a survivor may access information online, but still face institutional retaliation, financial barriers, or lack of community support. So mitigation really requires stronger privacy practices, trauma-informed design, human support systems, and as I mentioned earlier, community feedback. We need that to be continuous. We want to use technology to strengthen the ecosystems that we have of support, but not substitute them. I know when I make a phone call, if there's something wrong with like my bank account, I don't want to talk to a machine. I want to talk to a person to give them what's going on, because there's a little more nuance to what's happening. Whereas I think technology should be able to provide information that's correct, that's consistent, that's updated, but it shouldn't take away the empathy and the care that's behind what we should be practicing as people anyways.
Completely agree. Julia, I wanted to hear the same from you about the potential drawbacks or risks on relying on technology for these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that risk that we're talking about really is techno-solutionism in general, this belief that if we build one right tool, we've solved this whole problem. And I think just echoing what Kenyora shared, like, it's because sexual harm is a symptom of something much, much larger, right? That's rooted in culture, in power, and in these systems that have been failing survivors for a really long time. And fixing that requires a lot of things, right? It requires reducing stigma, helping institutions evolve, and just changing how survivors are treated when they do come forward. And we know like an app or any one technology alone can't do that. But what I think trauma-informed technology can do is move us closer to that goal of changing the culture and supporting survivors along the way until we get there. And that was why I was so grateful, Tracy, when Callisto invited us to speak here, because the unique work of everyone on this panel is what gives me hope for survivors in this time. So for our part, we built with U2 to facilitate connection and create prepared peers who could show up and mitigate that long-term PTSD risk. And we know it's going to be most powerful when it's already part of someone's daily life and that trust is already established. That's why PACT matters to us, but we also have to realize the reality of the situation, that someone might be downloading this app or any one of our services in the crisis moment, right? So we had to build the first aid kit in a way that even if the first time you look at it is when someone needs you the most, you're going to quickly be better prepared to respond. So we can automate guidance, offer some daily reminders that walk supporters through what to do during this really critical window where showing up matters. But as Kenyora said, we can't automate the care itself. So that's why when someone sends a support signal, it's going to real people in their circle, not a bot, not AI, like people. Because I think the big picture here is that technology can present that risk of creating isolation for people. And we know isolation is one of the main documented risk factors for developing PTSD after sexual harm. So that's the biggest thing to mitigate, I think, is to make sure that our technology is making supportive human connection easier to access, not trying to replace it.
Fully agree. I want to move to you, Kyle, because I think that you have more experience dealing with AI than the rest of us on this panel, and we can't have a tech panel without talking about AI in 2026. So, how do you see the development of AI impacting the work of serving survivors and the gender-based violence movement overall?
Yeah, I think this is a big question, and this is a quickly evolving question. These technologies and tools, there's so much investment going into these various, AI systems and tools that it is changing on a day-to-day basis. So just the first step, I think, is sort of acknowledging that this is a shifting landscape, but I do think it is our job to be iterative and to listen to those changes and shifts and understand how it can impact our work. And I think that when starting to lean into how it can impact our work, I view it from a few different lenses. One, I think that there is how can it impact our team, like our human team's ability to get things done quicker. Our space as a whole is underfunded. We will never have the funding of a for-profit company, a for-profit tech company to execute with the same speed and capacity, but these tools help level that playing field. We have the ability to do deep research across different departments. We have the ability to have assistants that can help us with tasks as we're working on other things. I think it allows us to be much more efficient as a team with the tasks that we're accomplishing across marketing, fundraising, product development, operations, and everything else. So internally, I think it has a dramatic opportunity to help us in the work that we're doing. But really, the way that we're looking at it is all of the deliverables that we are using artificial intelligence for have to be human reviewed. Like a human is always going to be in the loop, considering the sensitivity of the topic area that we are working in. So I think it can help us internally with the tools and things that we're building. And then I think it can also help us externally. We're starting to use it in some different capacities when it comes to going out and finding information, finding survivors in other places that are not on our website, and helping us identify those spaces where those folks are and identify opportunities to engage in other channels that are not ours. So I think that there's a huge level of opportunity to apply it to these very specific use cases where we go, well, we want to go, ascertain sort of where survivors are in Reddit, for example, and look at the sort of content. Let's do an analysis of that content, and then let's learn from that and adapt our system according to that. And then I think that the last area I'll mention around artificial intelligence is just really, I think understanding how people are using these other systems. So one of the projects that we're taking on this year is we're going to be doing, so Dr. Laura Cinco and her team did an analysis with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center of survivor needs. And under that survivor needs assessment, they determined that survivors are using chatbots without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think that's a huge surprise to anyone, but they sort of got into the nuance of that. And I think that there is an opportunity we have as a tech organization working with technology tools to analyze these other systems. And so the project we're taking on is a benchmarking analysis where we are coming up with a list of queries that we feel are representative for survivors to ask and test these systems, to then evaluate them on a rubric on how well they respond to these issues. And then we're able to provide those recommendations as responses to the large model companies to say, here are the guardrails that you should improve for the topic areas that we're focused on. And in some cases, potentially apply public pressure if these improvements are not substantial enough and these models are not actually providing the right responses to these sensitive topic areas. So that's another way that I think we can leverage these systems and think about these things outside of just our own bubble and our own technology that we're building and say, how can we think about ways to impact survivors as a whole for the broader movement? So lots of disparate areas, lots of opportunities. It's constantly changing, but those are a few of the ones that we're thinking about.
Yeah, that's so great. And just, I think it's important to realize how survivors are using AI, just like you said. And I think that it is important to say on this call that if you're a survivor using AI as a therapist type of thing like ChatGPT or Claude, remember those things are not confidential. And so those can be subpoenaed. And so it's just important to remember that as well. So I know we want to get to questions. So we've got a couple minutes left before we're going to get to questions. So I'm just going to ask one more. And Julie, I'm going to start with you of like, how do we view our work in juxtaposition to others in the gender-based violence movement and remaining responsive to that global technological advancement?
Yeah, I think we've all said it in different ways here today already. We're all just one piece of this puzzle, like doing work. Every single person on this panel, everyone out there doing this work is doing work that's vital to survivors. And the only way to change the way society is facing as this public health crisis is to all be working together. For us, our role is not in the investigation or reporting pathway because those systems exist. We're trying to come into this area that is absent for the most part, which is preparation for caring for that injury. Because we've seen society respond by handing a person who is harmed a set of institutional processes to navigate. And they're often, again, doing that alone in shock and overwhelm. And we don't treat any other injury this way. We're not handing someone with a broken leg a legal intake form. We're giving them first aid, and the people around them have some idea of what to do. And if they don't, they have some idea of who to call. Because we've established safety plans for almost every other situation our society faces that's dangerous, but just not this one. So that's what we're really trying to do, is just support the people that are most likely to show up first, those peers. Because what research tells us is that social support from those known trusted people is going to be one of the strongest indicators of recovery. And so we're just trying to build that infrastructure for that social safety. And on staying responsive, we're just trying to stay connected to the people we're building for and stay aware of the way technology is advancing so we can keep meeting those needs as best as possible for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think at Callisto, we just want to be a tool in everybody's toolbox. You know, that we want to partner with all of the local rape crisis centers and anybody doing work with survivors, and we want to be a tool for survivors to use. Maybe not the tool, but a tool. So, Kenyora, what about you? What do you think about this question?
I mean, I'm echoing both what you and Julie had mentioned, but I would say, each of us are bringing a unique gift or tool in that toolbox to the gender-based violence movement. And I think that's why thinking of us as an ecosystem matters. You have some groups that focus on healing. You have some groups that focus on legal advocacy, prevention education, maybe even youth organizing. And so, for us at NRAPE on campus, we focus on transparency and systems change. And, I know that I can't do this work by myself, and I'm not about to do this work in competition with anyone else in this movement who's trying to create that cultural change too. So I rather coordinate with folks, hence why, we even came together, as a panelist to do this. Because as technology advances even globally, we need to have shared values. We need to make sure that survivors have autonomy, that there's, privacy and accessibility, equity, like accountability all across the board. But, innovation without movement, values can become harmful. And so the movement values paired with smart innovation can be transformative. And so, EROC can do this thing here, Callisto can do this thing over there, with you can do their thing our way, but as a collective, we're able to say, here's how you can use all of these things to transform not only your own journey, but also for you to seek, that healing and that justice you've been looking for. And then also, like, we're not also the only ones. We can connect you with other folks in this movement who may have something else that you need that we are not able to provide. And we're not, at least I'm not a gatekeeper, and I don't think anyone else here, is on this panel. So it's about making sure that we're creating an ecosystem that meets the unique needs of every survivor.
That was a perfect tie up to this panel section. And so, Nina, I'm not sure if you're going to get on and do the questions.
Yeah.
Or if you want us to just.
Yeah, Tracy, I'm happy to relay the questions that are in the chat. So one of them actually is for you, Tracy. What happens if someone enters a rapist info on Callisto and there is no match?
And first, Sarafa, you can stop sharing your screen because we can see the questions. Thank you. So if nobody, if a rapist is entered into Callisto and there's no match, then all of that information is saved in the encrypted state and nobody can see it. So that survivor just doesn't get a match. And not getting a match doesn't mean that their perpetrator is not a serial perpetrator. It just means that their other survivors have not used the system. We do offer resources after they enter a match so that they can access resources like End Rape on Campus, like the crisis text line, and other resources in their communities. But other than that, it just sits there in the encrypted state. And I do want to make a note with that is that it can be any kind of sexual assault that a survivor puts in, because we know, I think Kyle alluded to this, of that a lot of survivors don't know what happened to them with sexual assault. And so it might be groping, it might be sharing inappropriate or sharing non-consensual images with somebody else, and it might be rape. But if you don't know and you feel violated, you can still also use Callisto, because again, we're not reporting to police, and you can get those options to see, does what happened to you qualify as sexual assault? And if you have matched with another survivor, it may mean that the perpetrator is escalating and they didn't rape or sexually assault you, but that it got to they did to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Our next question, which I think is for all of you all, so whoever would like to take it, what options are available for sharing these resources and collaborative opportunities with other organizations? Is there anything for child sexual abuse survivors, which I think Kyle, maybe you can talk to that a little bit. So yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I can jump in briefly. So typically all of our organizations have cultivated a list of resources that we provided some part in our process of folks engaging with our site or platform. And so we try to, this can be a little bit difficult, as you can imagine, on like a US versus global sort of perspective. But really, that's one of the things we're focusing on, is how do we improve that infrastructure of resources? Like, if we know that your IP address is coming from the United States, and then we know that you're in a particular area, and we know that you're topically interested in, child sexual abuse, for example, related resources, like how can we provide better sort of routing to those right resources? But the majority of us have like supplemental resources that we provide through different means. One other group that we work with is No More, and they have a global directory of resources where they've validated resources in every single country for various areas. So a lot of times there's a lot of work, like ugly work in the back end, and like the databases of how do we pull all these things in, how do we make sure they're validated, and then how do we provide the best resource recommendations. But all of us have slightly different approaches, considering the topic areas and the survivors we serve are a little bit different.
I'm happy to chime in on that too, Nina. At With You Too, we are in partnership with I Have the Right To, which is an organization who offers prevention education and workshops in person in schools, beginning as early as elementary school. So while this can be a complex thing to be talking about regarding minors and people who are of age, we wanted to be sure that we were partnering with folks that were addressing this problem starting at a very early age, because we know that's when it is happening. So I encourage anyone who's looking for resources for that to look up I Have the Right To and see the workshops that they're offering at schools all over the country.
Julia, and all right, please, if you want to jump in.
One thing I'll add is definitely I Have the Right To. We partner with them, but also Safe Bay is another organization that we've partnered with that focuses on the high school sector, as well as Know Your Nine also focuses not only just on college campuses, but also high school. And on our mapping tool, we have the ability where we've connected some of our partners' technology tools on the resource tab. So if anyone's looking for other resources like Callisto's form, like they'll be able to find that there as another available resource. We've also partnered, really our kind of bread and butter, if you will, is partnering with schools themselves. So even though we focus on the colleges and university arena, we're also very much open to meeting with especially high school students in high schools to discuss, some of the things that they should be thinking about prior to, if college is their next chapter, what that looks like. So we're very big on not only partnering with other organizations, but definitely student organizations, things of that nature.
Thanks, y'all. So I think we have time for maybe two more questions. One of them is, are there currently any opportunities to volunteer or intern on the tech side? And anyone can take this question.
I can take this one quickly. Absolutely. I mean, for our wave specifically, absolutely. We've got several engineers that are volunteering with us under our CTO, and then we have UI UX designers, we have researchers, research assistants, marketing people. So we're constantly looking for skilled folks that want to apply their skills to a particular area. Writers. So at least on our end, yes. And we've got a volunteer form on our website if you want to just go to our team page, and then there's a way to sign up there. But obviously all of us are doing good work, and I'll let the others speak if they're open to volunteers. So but we are, at least.
We're not currently open for volunteers, but we hope to be soon.
Alrighty. So I think maybe one last question, and selfishly, this is from myself, but I'm wondering if you all have any final message that you would like to send survivors on this call today. And Tracy, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think anytime I get asked that question, it's you're not alone. We are building resources. There are so many resources out there beyond even the four of our organizations. And as I said before, we know that options are necessary and education is necessary because a lot of times people never want to think about sexual assault or rape until it happens to them or somebody that they love. And that's when they really start to tune into this. And then they're like, where do I begin? Again, that's why Julia's app exists. And so you're not alone, and that most of the time the perpetrator has harmed somebody else too. And it's not your job to report to protect anybody else. The only person's responsibility for a sexual assault is the offender, whether or not you report it, and then the perpetrator has gone on to offend other people, because we know that there's so many people that report and don't get justice. So that is the main thing that I would have to say, is that you're not alone.
Right. Does anyone have anything else to add? Please, Kyle, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think when I first got into this work, I did not, I'm newer to this work, 2018, 2019, when we were first starting the organization, and we've come a long ways. I've learned a lot. But when I first got into this work, I feel like I used to view the survivors in my life and and just survivors as a whole as these like glass objects that we had to like hold extreme levels of sensitivity around and be extremely careful with. And there's an element of that is absolutely true, right? Like, people have experienced the worst thing in their life, and we have to be sensitive to that, and we have to support those people. But I think what I've really learned over the years is how strong and resilient survivors are, and how amazing they are at supporting their peers using their experience and sort of what they've learned and what they process through their own trauma to then give back to others. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most over the years is just how folks that have experienced the worst thing that's ever happened to them are so willing and excited to contribute to others and to help them navigate that path. And then coming out of the back end of that, as frankly being stronger and more resilient than folks who maybe have not received or not experienced that form of trauma. And so I think that real perception that I had originally has been dramatically corrected as over time. And I don't know, I think that journey is possible for anyone. It just requires support. It requires time. It requires healing, and it requires sort of processing, and it does require some work, but that's something that's at least been incredibly inspiring to me over the years of learning.
And I'd add to that, for any survivors who are on this call, or any friends of survivors, parents of survivors, whoever, where, like, as long as you're standing on the side of survivors, I just want to say survivors do not need technology for technology's sake. If anything, survivors deserve to have not only power returned to you, but to have, if you're going to use technology, to have tools to help you understand your options, to find supports or protect your privacy, and to collect and document what happened if you choose, and make that decision on your own terms. And so I would say that, we are here as folks who are integrating and have technology in this space because it's just another tool, again, to Tracy's point, another tool to add to your toolkit. But we want to make sure that you also have these tools that are not increasing harm and that provide you with that safety and accessibility and respect that you may be looking for. So whatever that looks like, for you, you have the choice to decide what technology also looks like for you. And so technology should be able to open doors, not create additional barriers for you. Yeah, we don't want to create anything that increases harm, but if anything, it mitigates, reduces it, or if anything, puts an end to it for all. I want to be out of a job, people, to be honest.
And I'll add, I think something that, as Jess and I have been working on this the last few years, we hear from so many people is survivors don't want to be a burden. And so often we sit with this alone because we're afraid of being too much or asking too much of people. But on the flip side, what we've heard from every other person showing up in these spaces is they really want to help. They really want to show up for survivors. And we have to be open to letting them do that for us and letting them make mistakes on the way, because that's going to happen too. And so if you are a survivor in this room, no matter how long ago it happened, when you disclose, like when an incident happened, it's still okay to show up and ask the people around you for support because they want to show up for you. And I don't want anyone to think that there is a time limit on support or a point where it's you don't need it anymore. It's okay to ask. And for all the supporters, like, please consider using all these resources that we've all been working on to be able to feel confident showing up for survivors in your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. I think that is a great way to end our chat today. So again, thank you to our wonderful panelists. If we want to give them some love through some reactions, that would be amazing. And thank you to you all for attending today's panel. This webinar will be uploaded to the Share Title IX and Title VI YouTube page. After that upload, everyone who attended will be sent a link. And although our time together has ended, this event may still bring up emotions as you move throughout your day. So we want to again highlight available resources, such as, for Stanford affiliates, Stanford students, you can contact the confidential support team. And for Stanford's faculty and staff, you can always go to the Faculty Staff Help Center. And again, for non-Stanford viewers, you can access the National Sexual Violence Resource Center for local resources, or the crisis text line for 24/7 support. All of these links will be in the chat again. And finally, for our Stanford folks, there are 2 more SAAM events happening on campus this month: Take Back the Night and the Denim Day Resource Fair. If you want to learn more about our SAAM programming at Stanford, you can go to bit.ly /share SAAM 2026. So thank you again for joining us. We'll be sure to follow up with all the information that we shared today, including the slides, and also contact information for our panelists as well. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, y'all.